They sang with a fire that felt almost otherworldly, voices that cracked the sky, performances that froze time and talent so extraordinary that the world began whispering the unthinkable. From Aretha Franklin's trembling, heaven-shaking vocals to Prince's haunting stare and Michael Jackson's impossible moves, rumors spread that their brilliance came from more than talent, that something unseen stood behind them. The question has lingered for decades. Did an invisible force guide these legends to greatness? Or is this simply how people make sense of genius so powerful it feels supernatural? And then there are the others, the 9 names hidden behind velvet curtains and dim backstage lights. Their stories, their whispers, their secrets might be even more chilling. These rumors didn't die. They traveled through smoky nightclubs, studio hallways, recording booths, and the hearts of millions of fans. Before we reveal the 11 legendary names surrounded by these haunting mysteries, hit like and subscribe. You won't want to miss the truth behind the legends. 1. Aretha Franklin. The first sound that floated through the cramped, dim-lit recording studio wasn't just a note, it was a force. The moment Aretha Franklin opened her mouth, the engineer's hand froze on the volume knob. Her voice rose so effortlessly, so powerfully, that it felt as though she were summoning an unseen choir from beyond the veil. Those who were there would later swear that the room fell into an unnatural stillness. No one dared speak. No one even shifted in their chair. All they could hear was their own breath mixing with her trembling, heavenly tone, as if something not of this world had stepped into that small studio. That moment became the seed of rumors that would shadow her for the rest of her life, whispers that a hidden force stood behind her, pushing her beyond human limits. Aretha came from a minister's home. Gospel saturated her childhood. In her earliest years, she sang only in church, sometimes shyly tucked between the other choir girls. But even then, her voice made the entire congregation look up from their hymnals. People said it wasn't just talent, it was revelation. Yet when she crossed from the sanctuary to the secular stage, something shifted. The same voice that shook stained glass windows suddenly carried a weight that could silence a nightclub. In the American South, where the line between sacred and secular was carved deep in people's beliefs, many began whispering that she had made some sort of exchange, that no one could hold power in both worlds unless something mysterious was guiding her. Fans recounted nights when her singing resonated so profoundly that they wept without understanding why. One Chicago audience member famously confessed, "I felt like she wasn't singing for us, but for someone else, somewhere." That one statement became fuel for endless theories about an invisible connection. The rumors exploded after she recorded Respect, the song that became a rallying cry for the civil rights movement. To stir millions with a single anthem, some insisted she must have been touched by a power deeper than talent. Few knew that before her global rise, Aretha endured a season of near collapse, stalled career, fragile health, bouts of silence. And then, without warning, she returned transformed. Her voice was stronger, her presence sharper. This dramatic rebirth sent new waves of speculation through gospel circles and soul gatherings. What had she given up? What had she gained? Reporters scribbled observations in newspapers across the country. Something has changed completely in the way she sings. It sets as if another flame is singing with her. Aretha never confirmed or denied any of it. She moved through the rumors with grace, leaving the public to interpret the extraordinary in their own way. To many, she was simply a black woman who achieved the impossible, a queen who ruled both the church pew and the radio chart. And because society could not fathom that a woman like her could rise so high on talent and grit alone, they created supernatural explanations to make sense of it. Some nights, after the applause faded and the stage lights dimmed, fans would spot her sitting quietly backstage, fingers gently wrapped around the small silver cross at her neck, her eyes closed in private prayer or contemplation. That image, the titan of soul becoming a lone woman seeking silence, kept the rumors alive for decades. It was in that contrast, in that mystery, that Aretha's legend was born, a voice too powerful for earth and a presence too human to fully understand. 2. Stevie Wonder. One unforgettable night at the Apollo Theater, a thin boy in oversized dark glasses stepped into the spotlight. Stevie Wonder was barely a teenager then, his small hand trembling over the harmonica as the crowd waited in breathless silence. You could feel the tension, a mixture of nerves, expectation, and disbelief. Then he blew the first note. The reaction was instant. The theater erupted into cheers so loud they rattled the balcony. People jumped to their feet. Others froze, stunned, their eyes filling with tears. It felt impossible that a blind child could unleash a sound so silky, so complete. It seemed less like music from a boy's lips and more like something descending from another realm straight into the heart of everyone listening. Backstage, even the stagehands were shaken. One whispered to another, "There's no way this is just talent. This kid is carrying a secret." What started as casual remarks soon swelled into myth. Stevie became Motown's miracle, the boy who saw with sound. Though his eyes had never witnessed sunlight, his musical vision surpassed that of grown men twice his age. People wondered how a child born blind and into poverty could play piano, harmonica, drums, and bass with pinpoint accuracy that seemed almost supernatural. Critics joked, half seriously, that Stevie's gift went beyond practice, as if he had made an unseen pact for perfect musical sensitivity. Friends from his early years remembered that Stevie never learned music the normal way. He didn't need sheet music. He could hear a song one single time on the radio and immediately play it back flawlessly on the piano, every chord and rhythm intact. A veteran studio musician once recalled how the team struggled for hours to create a solo for a track. Stevie, just 12 at the time, picked up his harmonica and played the exact missing phrase, the one the adults had been desperately searching for. It was like he heard the part the song was begging for, the musician said, before any of us even knew it existed. Stories like these fed the legend. Stevie himself never entertained the rumors. Whenever asked, he simply smiled gently and said his gift came from love, love for music, love for sound, and endless hours of practice. But for those who stood in a room with him, those who heard a blind boy summon melodies that felt too perfect for this world, that explanation never seemed quite enough. They believed, and still believe, that a miracle chose Stevie Wonder, turning what should have been a lifetime of limitation into one of the greatest gifts music would ever know. 3. Jimi Hendrix. Jimi Hendrix was never meant to live an ordinary life. Even as a skinny boy wandering through the worn-out neighborhoods of Seattle with an old, nearly broken guitar strapped across his back, he carried an aura that set him apart. His torn jeans, patched-up strings, and rain-soaked shoes didn't hide the intensity in his eyes, a strange mix of hunger, longing, and a sadness as deep as the night sky. People who noticed him back then rarely forgot him. There was something in the way he held that guitar, almost like a lifeline, that hinted at the storm he would one day unleash. In 1966, he was still nobody, just another opening act in smoky New York bars where the smell of beer clung to the walls. The tips were small, the rooms half empty, and the applause thin. Yet less than a year later, he was kneeling under the blinding lights of the Monterey Pop Festival, setting his Fender Stratocaster ablaze in front of the world. The sudden rise, from unknown guitarist to rock's electrifying force, was so shocking that many whispered the same question: what had he sacrificed to get here? Jimmy's life had cracks long before the music world discovered him. He was born into poverty to parents whose relationship fell apart early. His childhood was marked by instability, bouncing between relatives and houses, always clutching a cheap guitar with mismatched strings. Nights were spent under a rusty tin roof, listening to rain echo like ghostly whispers while he practiced alone. Under the dim glow of street lamps, Neighbors often saw him standing motionless, fingers trembling lightly on the strings as if trying to escape into some realm only he could sense. Those lonely years carved the sound that would later define him. Music both tender and violent, gentle and furious, filled with the ache of a boy searching for a place in a world that offered him none. But what truly fueled the rumors was the impossible speed of his transformation. One veteran guitarist confessed to Melody Maker, "I thought I knew everything a guitar could do until Hendrix appeared. His sound felt like it came from another universe." Praise like this fed a growing belief that Jimi had tapped into something beyond human technique, something closer to myth. And myths were already waiting for him. In the American South, blues musicians still passed down the legend of Robert Johnson meeting a mysterious force at a crossroads to gain superhuman talent. Hendrix fit too neatly into that story. Friends recalled him waking from dreams humming melodies he had never heard, then playing them flawlessly without practice. Jimi himself once said, "I don't search for the music searches for me." That single quote exploded into rock folklore. But behind the superstition lay a harsher truth. Jimi Hendrix was a black man dominating a genre America believed it owned. Rock was considered white territory, and his brilliance shattered that illusion. Instead of accepting that a black musician had reinvented the guitar, some chose to believe there had to be a supernatural force behind him. Anything, it seemed, was easier than admitting he had changed the rules with pure genius. This was the burden he carried, the weight of being so extraordinary that people refused to believe he was real. Jimi never denied the rumors. He simply let his guitar speak, and on that legendary night in Monterey, as flames devoured his Stratocaster, and the crowd watched in stunned silence, a journalist wrote, "Hendrix wasn't set performing, he was summoning something ancient." Yet perhaps the real story wasn't the rumor of a dark pact, but the loneliness hidden within every electrifying riff. His music was the cry of a soul shaped by poverty, heartbreak, and a world that never truly welcomed him. That pain, transformed into sound, became the fire no one could look away from, the fire that made Jimi Hendrix unforgettable. Prince. The audience who filled the hall that night swore that the moment he opened his mouth to sing, the stage lights flickered unnaturally, as if a pulse of electricity rippled through the air. One of his band members would later confess, "We played hundreds of shows, but some nights, the lights and the sound seemed to breathe with Prince." That strange blend of his signature purple glow and the hypnotic atmosphere convinced many that what they witnessed went far beyond an ordinary performance. Prince was, by nature, a living mystery. Everything about him, the shimmering purple suits, the shadowy eyeliner, the cryptic lyrics drenched in cosmic imagery, hinted that he was guarding a secret few could ever understand. Within the underground music circles of Minneapolis, whispers spread that Prince had once attended gatherings of people studying occult philosophies simply to spark his creativity. A handful even claimed they saw him speaking with a well-known figure in esoteric circles, though no one ever produced proof. What truly fed the legend, however, was a line Prince casually whispered during a late-night performance. "There is more beyond the sound." Fans repeated it, like scripture. Critics printed it in bold across magazine covers, accompanied by the question, "What exactly lies beyond the sound?" No one had an answer, but from that moment on, every time Prince stepped onto a stage, the speculation about a pact with some hidden force flared up again. Fans described their concert experiences with an almost religious intensity. They said that on certain nights, Prince wasn't merely performing, he was steering the emotional current of the entire room with the tilt of his head or the flick of his hand. His fusion of funk, rock, R&B, and something ethereal and unearthly made listeners feel as though he was opening a doorway to a realm just beyond human perception. There was no evidence for any of these claims, but each story only deepened the mystery. Prince never confirmed a single rumor. Whenever journalists prodded him, he offered a sly smile, a poetic riddle, or a vague metaphor that revealed nothing, and yet somehow made people even more curious. His silence became part of the myth. To audiences, Prince was never just a musician, he was a symbol, the man in the purple haze, whose presence alone stirred chills, whose music hinted at worlds unseen. The more people speculated, the more untouchable he became. In the end, the rumors remained just that, whispers left in the shadows. Prince departed this world, leaving behind a trail of unforgettable songs and unforgettable questions. No proof ever emerged of a pact, a ritual, or a hidden force guiding him. Perhaps that ambiguity was his greatest magic, an artist forever suspended between purple light and midnight whispers, leaving the world spellbound by a mystery no one will ever solve. 5. Whitney Houston. The very first sound that escaped Whitney Houston's lips during a New York audition made the entire room go still, as if someone had pressed pause on time itself. A producer who stood there that day later said, "We couldn't believe that such a slender young girl could release a voice that sounded like it had been lifted straight out of heaven." Every note soared with such purity, such effortless strength, that the onlookers felt as though they were witnessing something beyond human. The way she hit those high notes without a single tremble, another producer recalled, felt like the work of centuries of practice, not merely 20 years. That was the moment the whispers began. Rumors of a bond, a bargain, a price paid for glory, shadows that would follow Whitney for the rest of her career. Her rise was too fast, too polished, too close to perfection. Backstage, colleagues remembered her once joking to a circle of friends, "If there was something I could trade to succeed faster, I probably would." It was said lightly, tossed into the air like a harmless remark, yet when repeated by others, it transformed into a chilling line, a supposed confession of an invisible exchange. No one knew if she meant it, but the story took on a life of its own, feeding whispers of a hidden debt she carried in silence. In one backstage interview, she was quoted saying, "Under the stage lights, I think about the next life. I think about the price I have to pay." The statement had no mention of spirits, pacts, or the supernatural, but in the context of her astronomical fame, many interpreted it through darker lenses. Some saw it as a reflection of pressure, loneliness, and fear. Others believed it hinted at a secret she could never say out loud. In that era, it seemed every meteoric rise demanded a rumor of sacrifice. Whitney, being the brightest star of them all, could not escape the pattern. When she delivered her iconic rendition of the greatest love of all, her voice so glorious it felt sanctified, tabloids grasped eagerly for spiritual explanations. How else could one woman hold impossible high notes with such ease? One writer even dubbed her the girl who sings with the breath of the other side, a sensational phrase crafted more for sales than truth, but one that stuck nonetheless. Though Whitney never acknowledged a single rumor, the myths shaped her public image in quietly powerful ways. Fans admired her brilliance, yet sensed an unseen burden behind her dazzling smile. They saw the spotlight, but felt whispers in the shadows. Every time she lifted her chin and held a soaring note, some believed there was more behind her poise, a quiet agreement, a moment of surrender, even if only symbolic. That contradiction, divine talent wrapped in rumor and vulnerability, is what made Whitney Houston unforgettable. She became a legend standing at the peak of fame, surrounded by stories no one could prove and no one could silence. Perhaps the true mystery was never an invisible debt at all, but the world's desperate attempt to rationalize the extraordinary gift of a woman born to sing, a voice too magnificent to fit neatly into human explanation. 6. Marvin Gaye. The piano was the only thing breathing inside the dim recording studio. A single red light glowed on the console, quietly warning everyone that the tape was rolling. The room felt strangely sacred, too silent, too heavy, like a vigil. Marvin Gaye sat hunched over the keys, his gaunt face hidden beneath shadow, his fingers trembling slightly as though unsure whether they had the strength to begin. A musician who stood just a few feet away later recalled that the air seemed to thicken in that moment, as if the walls were closing in, waiting. And when Marvin finally opened his mouth, the first note sent shivers through the entire room. His voice didn't sound like it belonged to an exhausted man battling grief. It sounded ancient, dark, and painfully raw, as if it had crawled out of the deepest corner of the shadows. From that session onward, whispers began. Soft at first, then louder. Rumors that Marvin had tapped into something beyond human, that he wasn't alone in the room that night. The story clung to him for years. Marvin was no stranger to darkness. Raised in a strict religious home under a cold and punishing minister father, his childhood had been filled with fear more than comfort. When he entered Motown, audiences fell in love with his gentle smile, brown skin, and tender love songs. But behind the charisma was a lonely man living with silent torment. His career eventually stalled. He fell into emotional collapse, overwhelmed by pressure, loss, and despair. Yet out of that collapse came an impossible transformation. What's Going On? An album so spiritual, political, and piercing that it reshaped soul music itself. The shift was so sudden and so powerful that people began to ask questions. How could a broken man return with music that felt like prophecy? In the Southern music scene, stories spread that Marvin had confessed to hearing strange sounds during his darkest period. Voices or melodies guiding him through sleepless nights, directing every chord and lyric. A friend claimed Marvin whispered it like a secret he feared to acknowledge. The story was never recorded or verified, but it didn't need to be. It spread anyway. Context made the rumor irresistible. Marvin was caught between the raw truth of his soul and Motown's commercial demands. When he began singing about war, suffering, and injustice, many in the industry insisted he wasn't the same man. It's like he woke up as someone else, they said. This only fueled the belief that an unseen hand had pushed him past his former limits. Marvin never explained any of it. He didn't deny. He didn't confirm. His only answer was the music. In What's Going On, every note felt like a crack from a long-silenced heart finally breaking open. Fans said his voice had the warmth of a prayer, comforting, aching, almost pleading, as though he were singing to save himself rather than entertain the world. And after certain concerts, the mystery deepened. When the stage lights dimmed and crowds vanished, Marvin often sat alone with his guitar, staring into the empty room. One colleague even swore he saw Marvin whispering softly into the darkness, as if speaking to someone invisible. There was never proof, but the legend remained. Because to many, Marvin Gaye didn't just sing, he touched something the rest of the world could only feel, never fully understand. 7. Ray Charles. They say that the first time people heard Ray Charles perform live in a tiny Florida bar, the entire room froze, not out of politeness, but because it felt like they were witnessing something unreal. Ray sat behind an old weather-beaten piano, eyes tightly shut, his thin hands drifting over the keys with uncanny confidence. Then his voice, deep, hoarse, rising straight from his chest, filled the room like a desperate prayer wrapped in song. A server later remembered that several customers quietly slipped out mid-performance, not because they disliked the music, but because they felt something else singing through him, something they couldn't explain. From that night on, the legend spread the man with closed eyes, but a soul wide open. Ray Charles had lost his sight as a child, but instead of falling into despair, he sharpened his hearing to an almost superhuman degree. People said he didn't just hear melodies, he heard pain, breath, secrets, and longing buried inside other people's voices. That was why he could merge blues, gospel, and R&B into a sound that felt both sacred and earthly, both comforting and haunting. Some joked that Ray didn't need to see the world, he saw directly into the human soul. In the Southern gospel circles, whispers circulated that Ray once told a close friend, "Music is as simple as a prayer to me." The line, ripped from context, soon became proof of a mystical theory that some divine force guided him out of the darkness. Loyal fans swore that during his early performances, they felt an invisible light radiating from him, shifting the room's atmosphere in ways they couldn't explain. None of these stories were ever confirmed, but they built an image of Ray Charles not just as a genius, but as a vessel, a man gifted with something more than talent. And there was the undeniable fact a blind boy had broken the strict boundaries of gospel, reshaping them into love songs, dance hits and soul anthems that the entire world embraced. For some, that achievement seemed impossible without the touch of an unseen hand. Ray himself, however, never indulged in the rumors. He attributed everything to his faith and relentless dedication. He spoke often of his harsh childhood, of the countless nights spent memorizing the piano by touch, of hitting every note again and again until it finally sounded right. "When you can sit C," he once said, "you learn to listen more carefully than anyone else. That's all I ever did." But that simple truth, discipline, pain, and hunger, wasn't enough to satisfy the public's imagination. People preferred the myth, the mystery, the unseen force guiding a man who emerged from darkness to create light for the world. And so the legend lived on, not to replace Ray Charles, but to explain the magic he carried within him. 8. Tommy Johnson. Long before Robert Johnson's name echoed across the South, the blues world whispered another tale. The story of Tommy Johnson, the man whose trembling guitar and sobbing, guttural voice seemed carved out of sorrow itself. When drunk, Tommy would lean close to friends and confess, almost proudly, that he had sold his soul at the crossroads for the gift of music. The image of him standing alone under the moonlight, waiting at the intersection of two dusty dirt roads, soon became etched into Southern folklore. Though Tommy never reached the towering fame that Robert later achieved, his eerie confession marked him as the true origin of the Crossroads legend, the man who first dared to speak of a bargain with forces unseen. When Robert Johnson eventually rose with his unmatched guitar skills and mysterious premature death, the spotlight shifted. Tommy's story faded into the background, and many mistakenly believed Robert was the first to be tied to a soul pact. Yet today, scholars still point to Tommy Johnson as the seed of one of America's most haunting musical myths. Whether his tale was truth, drunken poetry, or a desperate dream, it created a tragic and unforgettable chapter in blues history, one where poverty, ambition, and superstition intertwined under the shadow of an unshakable legend. 9. Michael Jackson. The lights inside Madison Square Garden dimmed until the stadium felt like a giant held breath. Then a single drum beat cracked through the silence. A cold blue beam swept across the stage and caught Michael Jackson's face at the exact moment he glided into his first moonwalk. People in the crowd later said the chills that ran through them didn't come from the music, but from the eerie sensation that something unseen was moving with him. Even in the early years of Thriller, rumors began swirling around Michael like smoke, whispers of something dark behind the shimmering stardom, and those whispers stayed with him for the rest of his life. Michael Sepp's rise wasn't set normal, it was a storm. The shy boy who once trembled on stage with the Jackson 5 transformed, within a few short years, into a global giant whose talent seemed too large for any one human body to hold. To many fans, it felt impossible that flesh and blood alone could dominate charts, break records, and redefine music for so long, so they searched for explanations in the supernatural. Tabloids began publishing claims of an invisible contract, a mythical pact that kept his voice ageless, his moves flawless, and his influence untouchable. Some pop culture blogs repeated an alleged quote Michael supposedly whispered to close associates, "Everyone wants me to stop, but I can sit." There was never evidence of this statement, but that didn't matter. People twisted it into a hint, a suggestion that he was being led, pushed, or driven by some force he couldn't escape. So every time he appeared backstage with a distant, troubled expression, the rumor resurfaced, as though the world needed an explanation for the unstoppable fire inside such a slender, soft-spoken man. When Thriller dropped, the rumors exploded. The zombies, the shadows, the haunting visuals, fans convinced themselves that Michael was sending a hidden message. Some even insisted that Dancing with Ghosts was a metaphor for a pact in the dark. And because Thriller became the best-selling album in history, many decided that success of that magnitude must have come with a supernatural price attached. Michael Jackson never confirmed or denied any of it. He simply stayed silent. That silence became gasoline on the fire. It allowed believers to imagine anything they wanted, combined with his shifting image, sometimes dazzlingly divine, other times painfully isolated. The myth only grew bigger. To his devoted fans, he was nothing more than a once-in-a-century genius carrying the crushing weight of global fame on his shoulders. But to those who loved embellishment, his silence meant he was guarding a secret he could never speak. Whatever the truth, one thing is certain: Michael Jackson's legend was always wrapped in shadows as much as in light. His greatness was so immense that the world felt compelled to mythologize him, to fill the unexplained with stories no one could prove. And so, under the blazing stage lights, Michael Jackson will forever remain the man who danced beyond gravity, and the figure forever followed by whispers of a silent pact no one has ever seen. 10. Robert Johnson. There was once a thin young man drifting along the Mississippi with nothing but an old, battered guitar. In the smoky bars where he played, Robert Johnson was considered ordinary, just another wandering musician with a restless soul. Then, without warning, he vanished from the scene. And when he returned, everything had changed. His fingers danced across the strings with a mastery no one had ever heard before. His music was sharper, darker, more haunting, so astonishing that the entire Southern blues community froze in disbelief. That unbelievable transformation sparked a story that would outlive him. The rumor claimed that on a moonless night, Johnson walked to a deserted crossroads, guitar in hand, and met a shadowy figure standing in the dark. The figure, said to be the devil himself, tuned Robert's guitar, played a few unearthly notes, and handed it back. From that moment, the legend of the Crossroads Pact was born. Researchers later traced the tale to hoodoo traditions, and the spirit Leba, guardian of Crossroads, believed to open paths for those seeking power. In the South, where African American folklore mingled easily with myth, the rumor grew vivid and irresistible. Some scholars argue that the legend reveals something deeper: society's refusal to accept that a black man from rural poverty could achieve brilliance without supernatural help. But whatever the truth, the Crossroads story transformed Robert Johnson into an immortal figure, inspiring films, novels, and countless musicians who still chase the haunting echo of his blues. 11. Beyoncé. During a breathtaking performance at Glastonbury, as Beyoncé stood drenched in a brilliant halo of gold, her hair whipping through the wind and her voice crashing like thunder across the field, something shifted in the crowd. People stared in awe, whispering among themselves, "She doesn't look human anymore." That moment ignited a wave of rumors online, posts claiming that Beyoncé must have signed some unseen pact to possess such impossible stamina, charisma, and presence. A fan sit's light-hearted joke soon became a repeated line. "One day she sit's gonna show us the contract she made with the devil." Of course, it began as pure exaggeration, a dramatic way to praise a superstar whose talent seemed superhuman. But the joke refused to die. In one interview, Beyoncé said, "I know my purpose, I hear it from within." The internet quickly clipped the quote, spinning it into countless theories that the voice within was something supernatural guiding her. The media and fans eagerly added fuel to the fire, crafting mystical narratives that painted Beyoncé as an artist touched by hidden forces. In truth, there is no document, no confession, nothing from her that suggests any kind of soul-bound agreement. But in popular culture, rumors like these take on a life of their own. And so the myth persists, elevating Beyoncé into a near mythological figure, making her seem even more enigmatic every time she steps into the light. And that brings us to the end of another journey through the hidden corners of music. A world where brilliance and pain walk side by side, where every spotlight hides a shadow, and where rumors of dark pacts reflect our own fascination with the price of greatness. Music has always healed us, inspired us, and lifted us, but behind those unforgettable performances are stories of loneliness, ambition, and mystery that the public rarely sees. If this video made you reflect or opened your eyes to a side of music you've never considered, let us know in the comments. We want to hear your thoughts, your theories, and your questions. Before you go, don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our daily deep dives into the legends, secrets, and hidden truths of the industry. Your support keeps this journey alive. Thank you for watching until the very end. We'll see you in the next video.